We are raised to save. From our earliest memories, the instruction is explicit and repetitive. Avoid waste. Set money aside. Construct a safety cushion for uncertain times.
It is the dominant narrative. Earn, spend with caution, and save the remainder.
Precisely. Prudence is elevated to a virtue, and security becomes the ultimate objective. However, for this deep dive, our mission is to explore a rather provocative question regarding this traditional wisdom. What if this mindset, while responsible, is fundamentally incomplete?
That is the crucial inquiry.
We must consider what happens when society trains individuals to preserve money, but fails entirely to train them to create it. In our discussion today, we're going to unpack the psychological architecture behind wealth. We will establish that the distinction between what we will call the saver and the generator is not merely a matter of arithmetic. It is a profound psychological divergence.
It is a psychological divergence that dictates economic reality. We frequently view finance as a game of numbers, yet all evidence points to it being a game of mindsets. The saver and the generator operate on entirely different internal operating systems. The saver operates from a position of conservation.
Indeed, they view resources as finite and fragile. The generator, conversely, operates from a position of creation, viewing resources as malleable and expandable. The tragedy, of course, is that most educational and familial systems emphasize only the former. The latter is left to be discovered by accident, if at all.
This brings us to a critical distinction in strategy. We typically applaud frugality. We view the person who clips coupons and relentlessly limits expenditure as the absolute model of responsibility. Yet, if you apply a sports analogy to this financial behavior, a glaring limitation becomes apparent immediately.
You cannot win a championship solely by playing defense.
You simply cannot. Defense may prevent you from losing, but it does not secure victory.
That is the fundamental problem with prudence when it stands alone. Saving is a defensive mechanism. It is designed solely to protect what already exists. Generating, however, is an offensive strategy. It is designed to conquer new territory. In the financial realm, the vast majority of people remain permanently stuck in a defensive posture.
They are trained to minimize risk, but they lack the framework to calculate it intelligently.
That is an important distinction. They are adept at cutting expenses, yet they possess virtually no strategies for increasing value. The subtle, pervasive message they have absorbed is that stability is superior to growth,
Which is a dangerous assumption in the modern era.
it is mathematically flawed. In an economic environment characterized by inflation, rapid technological disruption, and constant transformation, growth is the only force capable of maintaining your current standing, let alone advancing it. Static preservation is effectively moving backward.
Let us unpack the psychology behind this defensive posture. The saver mentality is not arbitrary. It is deeply rooted in the cognitive psychology of scarcity. When we examine the established principles regarding scarcity, specifically the logic of cognitive bandwidth, we see that a focus on lack literally captures the mind.
The concept of cognitive bandwidth is absolutely essential here. When an individual is fixated on survival or the restriction of resources, their cognitive bandwidth narrows.
The mind tunnels.
It creates a profound tunnel vision. It focuses intensely on the immediate problem, how to pay the specific bill, how to save this single dollar. And in doing so, the brain loses the capacity for broad, long-term strategic thinking.
When survival is the primary focus, strategy fades.
That is the biological reality. Therefore, saving becomes an act of psychological protection. It quiets the immediate anxiety of scarcity. But while protection is necessary for survival, it is grossly insufficient for expansion. It maintains the present moment, but it fails to engineer the future.
Which leads to a very specific type of questioning within the saver's mind. The primary question always becomes, how can I spend less? And this question is inherently limiting.
Because it seeks to optimize within existing constraints.
It accepts the boundaries of the cage and merely tries to make the cage more comfortable.
That is a perfect encapsulation. It assumes the pie is fixed in size. The generator, however, rejects the constraints entirely. The generator asks a fundamentally different question. They ask, how can I create more?
And that shift in inquiry changes the neurological response.
Entirely. Instead of looking for cuts, the brain begins to actively scan for opportunities. Instead of fear, the primary driver becomes curiosity and ambition. The saver is playing a finite game, attempting to preserve a dwindling resource against the constant erosion of inflation. The generator is playing an infinite game, seeking to expand value continuously.
Let us transition fully into the psychology of the generator then. If the saver is defined by scarcity and protection, the generator is defined by abundance and value creation. The core principle here is that wealth is not a hoard to be guarded. It is a byproduct of value creation.
That is the defining characteristic of the generator mentality. Money is viewed not as the ultimate goal, but merely as the scorecard. The generator understands that if you can solve a complex problem, deliver a transformation, or build a robust asset, the financial resource will inevitably follow.
We can connect this deeply to developmental psychology as well. If we examine established frameworks regarding the stages of ego development, we see a striking parallel,
We do. The early stages of psychological maturity are heavily characterized by conformity, rule following, and a profound desire for security.
which perfectly mirrors the saver, following the established rules of employment, conforming to the standard budgeting advice, seeking safety above all else.
But as one matures psychologically, the focus shifts. As an individual moves to later stages of ego development, they prioritize autonomy, complexity, and systems thinking. The individual moves from being a rule follower to a rule creator.
They move from dependency to authorship.
That is the existential shift. The transition from saver to generator is, in many ways, an evolution of the self. It is the shift from accepting the financial script written by society to writing your own. And it requires a tolerance for ambiguity that the conformist stage simply cannot handle.
This aligns seamlessly with the concept of the growth mindset. If we apply that to an economic context, the saver embodies the fixed mindset. I have a set salary, I have a set amount of resources, and I must protect them at all costs.
While the generator embodies the growth mindset, I can become more, therefore I can earn more. The correlation between these mindsets and financial outcomes is undeniable. Fixed income is very often a reflection of a fixed identity.
That is a critical point for our listeners to absorb. Fixed income as a reflection of a fixed identity.
If you fundamentally believe your skills, intelligence, and capacity are static, then your income will naturally remain static. The generator operates on the premise that abilities can always be developed. If abilities can be expanded, then the value one provides can be expanded, and subsequently, income expands.
The saver says, I must protect what I have. The generator says, I can become more.
That internal belief system is the ultimate compounding asset.
And in a modern world driven by automation, artificial intelligence, and exponential speed, this shift appears to be moving from optional to utterly urgent. The barrier to entry for creating value has collapsed, but the barrier to mastery remains high.
The digital economy relentlessly rewards the creators, the connectors, and the curators. The safe path of the saver reliability, repetition, following instructions is exactly what algorithms and automated systems are designed to replace.
The generator's path innovation, high-level strategy, complex problem solving, is far more resistant to automation. We have clearly established the why of this transition. We must now analyze the how. For you, the listener, the transition from saver to generator rests on 4 specific pillars. The first pillar requires a complete reframing of risk.
Society generally defines risk as the possibility of losing money. That is an antiquated 20th century definition. In the 21st century, the true risk is the probability of stagnation.
If you are not taking risks, you are not learning.
And if you are not learning, you are rapidly becoming obsolete. The generator understands that the greatest danger is not a failed investment, but the failure to build adaptable skills. The generator intentionally invests in capability, communication, persuasion, technological fluency. These are meta skills that drastically reduce the risk of irrelevance.
That brings us to the second pillar, which is the shift from linear income to leveraged income. The saver is structurally trapped in the equation of time exchanged for money.
Which is an inherently limited equation because time is strictly finite. You cannot work 25 hours in a day. The generator focuses intensely on leverage. This means building assets that function entirely independent of their time.
This could be intellectual property, digital products, equity in a business, or simply a unique, highly specialized expertise that commands a massive premium.
The primary goal is to detach revenue from the direct input of hours. The generator constantly asks, what can I build today that will continue to work while I sleep? The saver, trapped in the linear mindset, never even formulates this question.
The third pillar concerns environmental design. We consistently underestimate the impact of our social environment on our ambition.
The brain is fundamentally a social organ. It normalizes what it repeatedly observes. If you are surrounded by people whose primary conversation revolves around budgeting, cutting costs, and a general fear of the future, your cognitive horizon will shrink to match that dialogue.
It becomes structurally difficult to think big in a small room.
It becomes nearly impossible. The generator consciously designs their environment to include conversations about opportunity, building, and expansion. Exposure reshapes ambition. You simply cannot generate a new reality if you are constantly validating the old one through your immediate social circle.
Moving to the fourth and final pillar, long-term thinking and compounding. But we must clarify, this is not just about compounding interest in a traditional bank account.
Not at all. It is about compounding skills, networks, and reputation. Generators possess a severe bias toward action that savers generally lack. Savers wait for absolute certainty. They desire a guarantee before they make a move.
Generators understand that clarity follows commitment.
They publish the work before they feel fully ready. They invest time and resources before the outcome is guaranteed. They understand that the learning curve itself acts as a massive compound interest mechanism. The precise knowledge gained from a failed venture today becomes the solid foundation for a highly successful venture tomorrow.
The saver sees the failure as a tragic loss of resources. The generator sees it purely as the acquisition of data.
That distinction changes everything.
This discussion inevitably leads us to a deeper, almost philosophical layer of the topic. This transition is not just about increasing net worth. It is fundamentally about identity. It is an existential question of agency.
It is the stark difference between being a participant who merely survives the system and a contributor who actively shapes it. We must consider the philosophical concept of human beings as designers of trajectories, rather than passive recipients of circumstance.
When you adopt the generator mindset, you are actively reclaiming agency.
You are stating unequivocally that you are not merely a leaf blowing in the economic wind, but an architect of your own condition.
There is also a profound irony embedded in this, which we might call the paradox of freedom. Many savers are driven by a deep desire for freedom. They save meticulously to escape the daily grind. Yet, because they never generate significant economic velocity, they remain permanently trapped in the very constraints they wish to escape.
That is the ultimate tragedy of the purely defensive strategy. You simply cannot save your way to freedom if your baseline income is insufficient. True sovereignty requires both stability and mobility.
Saving provides stability. It keeps the baseline secure.
But generating provides mobility. It allows for movement, for choice, and for significant impact. One protects the fortress, the other expands the kingdom. To rely solely on saving is to live in a fortress with the gates permanently locked, forever under siege from inflation and circumstance.
This suggests, importantly, that the goal is not to abandon the habit of saving entirely, but to integrate it into a much larger, more sophisticated framework.
We must be extraordinarily careful not to create a false dichotomy here, suggesting that one must be reckless to be a generator. The mature identity integrates both. We must transcend the saver mentality, not abandon the discipline of it.
This perfectly mirrors integral perspectives in developmental theory: transcend and include.
Exactly that mechanism. The fully realized economic actor protects the downside with extreme prudence, while simultaneously aggressively pursuing the upside with expansion.
One manages resources, the other manages potential.
Managing potential is the engine of wealth.
One manages resources, the other manages potential. That is a vital distinction for our listeners to internalize. The saver looks at the bank account and sees a static store of value. The generator looks at the bank account and sees fuel for the next engine.
And in a world evolving at an exponential speed, preservation alone is a guaranteed strategy for decline. Inflation is not merely monetary. There is a constant inflation of expectation, a rapid inflation of necessary skill requirements, and an inflation of baseline lifestyle costs.
If your strategy is static preservation, you are mathematically moving backward relative to the rest of the system.
It is worth elaborating on the intense cognitive dissonance this creates for many people. The saver deeply believes they are doing the responsible thing by prioritizing safety above all else, yet the results continuously lead to a profound feeling of anxiety and stagnation.
That dissonance arises because the map they are using no longer matches the territory they are navigating.
The safety first map was drawn in a completely different era, an era of guaranteed pensions, lifelong employment with a single corporation, and highly predictable economic cycles. In a volatile, highly complex modern economy, the only true safety lies in adaptability, the ability to generate new value on demand.
When a saver clings to that old map, they experience anxiety because their actions, the saving, the scrimping, the desperate avoidance of risk, simply do not produce the feeling of security they were historically promised.
Therefore, the generator mindset is actually a far more robust form of security, despite appearing riskier on the superficial level.
That is the core paradox.
By accepting the short-term risk of creation, the genuine possibility of failure, the significant expenditure of energy, The generator builds long-term anti-fragility. They become significantly less dependent on external systems because they have internalized the means of production.
Their wealth is not just located in their bank account. It is located entirely in their capability.
You can strip a generator of all their physical and liquid assets, and they will likely rebuild them rapidly. You strip a saver of their accumulated assets, and they are frequently rendered completely helpless because their entire strategy relied on accumulation, not creation.
This brings us back to the vital pillar of leveraged income. We touched briefly on assets, but we should clearly define what the term asset actually means in the context of the generator. It is certainly not limited to just real estate or index funds.
An asset, in this specific context, is anything that you create or own that solves a problem for someone else without requiring your active, continuous presence.
A recorded piece of music is an asset.
A software script is an asset. A highly trained and autonomous team is an asset. A widespread reputation for excellence is an extraordinarily valuable asset. The saver tends to view assets exclusively as financial products you purchase.
The generator views assets as systems you build.
It is a fundamental shift in daily orientation. One individual is a passive consumer of investment products. The other is an active producer of value.
And stepping into the role of producer requires a massive shift in how one views failure. We mentioned earlier that generators see failure merely as data. Can we expand on the psychological mechanics of how that actually works?
It requires completely decoupling the ego from the outcome of the endeavor. For the saver, or the individual trapped in a fixed mindset, a financial loss or a failed project feels like a direct indictment of their character or their fundamental intelligence.
It proves to them that they are inherently not good enough.
Therefore, they avoid any possibility of failure at all costs. For the generator, however, the project is merely an experiment. If it fails, the hypothesis was simply incorrect. They calmly adjust the variables and run the experiment again.
This scientific detachment allows them to iterate incredibly rapidly.
While the saver remains paralyzed by the overwhelming fear of making a mistake, the generator has already failed twice, learned 3 vital new skills, and is currently launching the 3rd, vastly improved iteration.
Speed of implementation seems to be the key differentiator resulting from that detachment.
Speed is a direct function of confidence. Not necessarily confidence in a positive outcome, but supreme confidence in one's own ability to handle whatever the outcome happens to be. The generator trusts their own resilience. The saver profoundly doubts theirs.
This is why the internal psychological work must be primary. You cannot simply hand a saver a brilliant business plan and expect them to execute it successfully.
They will inevitably self-sabotage because their internal operating system is hardwired to prevent loss rather than to capture gain.
Let us return briefly to the concept of environmental design. We discussed the impact of the social circle, but what about the individual's information diet?
The information diet is equally, if not more, critical. The saver continuously consumes content that reinforces fear. Constant news about impending recessions, articles on extreme frugality, endless warnings about scams and market crashes.
While the generator consumes content that reinforces possibility.
They read biographies of founders, they study deep analyses of emerging markets, they consume high-level tutorials on new technologies. The fundamental rule is that input determines output. If you feed your mind a steady diet of scarcity, it will inevitably produce thoughts of scarcity.
If you feed it a diet of expansion, it will produce ideas for expansion. It is a deliberate, highly conscious curation of reality.
It requires the honest acknowledgement that we are porous beings. We absorb the context we place ourselves in. The generator takes absolute responsibility for that absorption. They recognize that cynicism is a luxury they simply cannot afford.
Cynicism is easy. It is the ultimate defensive posture.
It will not work. The system is fundamentally rigged. It is too late to start. These are nothing more than saver rationalizations designed to justify inaction. The generator cultivates optimism. Not a blind, foolish optimism, but a rational optimism. The deeply held belief that complex problems can be solved and that immense value can still be added.
This connects directly back to the existential aspect we touched upon earlier, the profound idea of authorship. To be a generator is to claim authority over your specific contribution to the world.
It is a deliberate move from passivity to activity. The vast majority of people live completely reactively. They react to their bills, they react to the demands of their boss, they react to the macroeconomic climate.
The generator lives proactively. They initiate.
And to initiate is a highly vulnerable act. It opens you directly to criticism and failure, but it is also the only viable path to genuine, lasting impact. When you create value, you are effectively imposing your will on reality in a positive, constructive way.
You are saying, this solution did not exist and now solely because of my effort, it does.
That is a profoundly meaningful human experience, an experience that the saver mindset systematically denies itself.
Let us summarize this monumental shift for you, the listener. We are positing that the traditional advice you have been fed, be careful, save your pennies, avoid all risk, is entirely insufficient for the modern era.
It is insufficient because it addresses only one half of the survival equation. It addresses the preservation of what is, but completely ignores the adaptation to what will be.
The mission for you is to rigorously evaluate your own education and conditioning. If you were trained primarily to be careful, you must now actively train yourself to be creative.
If you were trained to guard the fortress, you must now train yourself to build the kingdom.
It requires a conscious, deliberate unlearning of the scarcity script. It demands that you stop asking how to merely survive the month and begin asking how to design the decade.
And that design process begins the moment you realize that you are the primary asset. The saver attempts to protect the money. The generator continuously improves the self in order to create the money.
The former is a state of external dependency. The latter is true internal sovereignty. As we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, vital provocation to consider.
The future undeniably does not belong to those who merely conserve wealth. It belongs entirely to those who possess the psychological capacity to continuously generate it.
So consider this. What asset can you begin building today? Whether it is a highly specialized skill, a leveraged relationship, or a scalable piece of work that will continue to generate value for you while you sleep.
Answering that question marks the definitive beginning of the transition.
A structural shift from defense to offense, from the limitations of scarcity to the reality of abundance, from saver to generator. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Deep Thoughts Podcast. I hope you found insights and inspiration to take with you on your journey of self-growth. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated on new releases and exclusive content. See you next time, where we'll continue to help you grow and explore your full potential.